I thought I was choosing salvation. I didn't know salvation was just another word for damnation. They came to me when the Emperor's grace felt like ash in my mouth. When prayers echoed hollow against hab-block walls. When my daughter's labored breathing counted down the hours until I'd bury her in the recyc-pits. The cult offered answers when the Imperium offered only suffering. They seemed kind. They seemed right. They seemed human. I was wrong about all of it. Let me show you how easily righteousness becomes heresy, how quickly a faithful servant becomes a vector of corruption. Let me show you how I damned my soul one reasonable choice at a time. The Emperor protects. I believed this once, with the fervor of the truly faithful. I recited the Imperial Creed each morning before my shift at the Administratum, lips moving in practiced rhythm as I dressed in my clerk's robes. The words were comfort and structure, a framework that made sense of the grinding existence we called life on Vocris Prime. The Emperor protects, provides, guides. All suffering serves his purpose. All hardship strengthens humanity. All sacrifice honors his eternal vigil upon the golden throne. My name was Matthias Kale. I say was because the man who bore that name no longer exists. Not in any meaningful sense. But in those days, 34 years into an unremarkable life, I was simply another faithful servant of the Imperium. A mid-level clerk in the Department of Tithe Assessment, Processing Division, Gamma 7. My days were spent reviewing data slates, verifying tithe calculations, ensuring the Imperium's endless hunger for resources was properly fed. It was tedious work, but I took pride in it. Every correctly processed assessment meant material for the Imperial Guard, munitions for the Emperor's wars, resources to hold back the darkness at the galaxy's edge. I lived in hab-block 47, sub-level 12, in quarters that were considered spacious by Hive standards. 3 rooms for 3 people. Myself, my wife Sarah, and our daughter Ellen. The walls were unpainted rockcrete, perpetually damp from condensation that no amount of sealing could prevent. The air recyclers hummed constantly, pushing processed atmosphere through vents that never quite eliminated the smell of promethium and industrial lubricant that permeated every level of the hive. But it was home. It was safe. It was ours. Sarah worked in a textile manufactory, operating looms that produced uniform cloth for the Astra Militarum. Her hands were calloused from 12-hour shifts, her hearing damaged by the constant clatter of machinery. But she never complained. She understood, as I did, that service was its own reward, that our labor, however small, contributed to humanity's survival. She sang hymns while she worked, the other shift workers told me. Her faith was pure in a way mine never quite managed to be, untainted by the questions that sometimes surfaced in the quiet hours before dawn. Ellen was 7 years old, small for her age but bright beyond her years. She attended the Schola on our level, learning Imperial history and basic literacy alongside 50 other children in a classroom that smelled of recycled air and unwashed bodies. She could recite the major saints' feast days from memory, knew the approved prayers for every occasion, and drew pictures of the Emperor as a golden giant watching over humanity. I kept those drawings, tucking them into my work data slate to look at during particularly grinding shifts. They reminded me why the tedium mattered, why the sacrifice was worthwhile. Our life was hard, but whose wasn't? The hive contained billions, stacked level upon level in a vertical city that disappeared into the polluted clouds above and the industrial depths below. Most lived in far worse conditions than ours. We had consistent rations. We had work. We had each other. By any reasonable measure, we were blessed. The Emperor provides, and he had provided adequately for the Kale family. But adequacy is a fragile thing, easily shattered. The first cracks in my faith appeared gradually, so subtle I didn't recognize them as cracks at all. They seemed like reasonable observations, minor frustrations with inefficiency rather than the first tremors of doubt. I processed tithe reports from thousands of worlds, seeing the raw numbers that translated into human suffering. A mining world stripped of 97% of its ore deposits, its population worked to death in toxic conditions to meet imperial quotas. An agri-world tithed beyond sustainability, its soil exhausted, its people starving while their grain fed forge worlds they would never see. A hive world like ours, giving up its children by the tens of thousands to the Astra Militarum, knowing perhaps 1 in 10 would survive their first engagement. The numbers were staggering. The suffering implicit in every data slate I processed was incomprehensible in its scale. And all of it was necessary, I told myself. The Imperium was vast beyond human understanding, threatened on all sides by horrors that would consume us if we showed any weakness. The tithes fed the war machine that kept humanity alive. Every sacrifice served the Emperor's grand design. But sometimes, late in my shift, when fatigue made the mental conditioning slip, I would wonder, does it have to be this way? Is there no better system, no more efficient method that would demand less suffering? The Imperium had endured for 10,000 years, but had it improved in all that time? Or had it merely continued, grinding forward through inertia and brutality, sustained by the suffering of countless trillions? These were dangerous thoughts. I recognized them as such, and suppressed them through prayer and devotion. The Emperor's plan was beyond mortal comprehension. To question it was to display arrogance unbefitting a faithful servant. I redoubled my attendance at the hab-block's prayer services, listened more attentively to the sermons of our local preacher, a hunched man named Volk, who spoke with absolute certainty about humanity's divine purpose. Then Ellen became sick. It started with a cough, the kind that was common among children in the lower hive levels. The air quality was poor despite the recyclers' best efforts, and respiratory infections spread quickly through the crowded scalas. Sierra and I weren't particularly worried at first. Children were resilient. The cough would pass, as childhood illnesses always did. But it didn't pass. It worsened. Within a week, Ellen was struggling to breathe, her small chest heaving with the effort of drawing air into compromised lungs. Her skin took on a grayish pallor, and her energy faded until she could barely stand without assistance. Sarah stayed home from the manufactory, sacrificing wages we could not afford to lose, to care for our daughter. I continued working, needing the income, but my mind was never on the data slates before me. We took Ellen to the local Medicaid station, a grim facility 3 levels down that served 20,000 citizens. The queue stretched around the corridor, suffering humanity waiting with the patience of those who had no other choice. We waited 6 hours to see a Medicaid attendant, not even a fully trained physician, just an overworked functionary with basic medical training and access to a limited pharmaceutical supply. The attendant examined Ellen with the bored efficiency of someone who had seen too many cases and cared too little. Respiratory infection, he confirmed. Probably bacterial. Definitely serious. The treatment was straightforward. A course of antibiotics that would clear the infection in a few days. The cost was equally straightforward. 140 credits. Payment in advance. No exceptions. I made 70 credits a week. Sarah made slightly less. Even combined, even saving everything and eating nothing, we could not afford the medicine. I explained this to the attendant, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. Surely there was some provision for hardship cases, some way to receive treatment for critically ill children. The attendant looked at me with the dead eyes of someone who had heard this plea 1,000 times. No credit, no medicine. That was the policy. If I couldn't pay, I should apply for a medical hardship loan through the Administratum's Social Welfare Division. The process typically took 4 to 6 weeks. My daughter likely had 4 to 6 days. I begged. I am not proud of this, but I begged. I offered to work extra shifts, to indenture myself if necessary, anything to get my daughter the medicine that would save her life. The attendant remained unmoved. Rules were rules. The Imperium functioned through order and discipline. Exceptions for one meant exceptions for all, and that path led to chaos. We returned to our hab, Ellen struggling for every breath. Sarah wept silently. Her face turned toward the wall so our daughter wouldn't see. I knelt before our small shrine to the Emperor. A simple alcove containing a printed image of the Aquila and a candle that we kept burning at all hours. I prayed with desperate intensity, begging for intervention, for mercy, for some sign that our faith and service meant anything at all. The Emperor protects. But as I listened to my daughter's labored breathing, as I watched her small body struggle against an infection that could be cured for a sum I could not possibly raise, the words felt hollow. They echoed in my skull without finding purchase, just sounds without meaning. I returned to work because I had no choice. The administratum did not grant leave for family emergencies except in cases of death, and even then, only one day to handle arrangements. I sat at my station, processing tithe assessments with mechanical precision, my mind elsewhere. My supervisor, a dour man named Hask, who had held his position for 30 years, noticed my distraction and reprimanded me twice for errors. The second time, he threatened to dock my pay. I apologized and focused harder, knowing that losing even a few credits might mean the difference between Ellen living or dying. It was during the third such reprimand that I made my first mistake. Hask stood over my station, his voice carrying across the processing floor, ensuring my humiliation was public. I was unreliable, he declared, a poor worker whose personal problems were affecting his performance. If I could not maintain proper standards, perhaps I should be reassigned to a more suitable position. Everyone knew what that meant: demotion, reduced pay, possibly even termination, and reassignment to corpse starch processing, or some other work, fit only for the truly desperate. I looked up at Hask, this petty tyrant whose life had been spent enforcing the grinding brutality of imperial administration, and I felt something I had never quite felt before. Not anger, though that was present. Not fear, though that too was there. But a cold, clear awareness that the system we served was not merely harsh or inefficient. It was evil. It was a machine that consumed human lives and called it necessary, that allowed children to die of treatable illnesses because their parents could not pay, that elevated men like Hask to positions of petty power and called it order. The thought was there and gone in an instant, suppressed by years of conditioning and genuine fear of where such thinking led. But it had been thought. The seed had been planted. And in the grim darkness of the Imperium, even the smallest seed of doubt can grow into something monstrous. That night, after another shift spent watching my work quality deteriorate under the weight of worry, I stayed late at the administratum. Sarah had sent a message through the local Vox network. Ellen's breathing had worsened. She might not survive the night. Come home if you can. But I couldn't go home. I couldn't watch my daughter die, couldn't face my own helplessness. So I stayed at my station, alone in the processing floor after the shift change, surrounded by data slates containing the suffering of thousands of worlds, feeling my own suffering as a small but crushing weight. It was then that I met Vascor. He appeared without sound, materializing at the edge of my vision like something half-remembered from a dream. I looked up from the data slate I had been staring at without seeing, its glowing surface filled with tithe calculations that suddenly seemed obscene in their banality. A man stood 3 workstations away, watching me with an expression of what appeared to be genuine concern. I had never seen him before, which was unusual. The processing division employed perhaps 200 souls, and while I did not know them all personally, I recognized their faces, their routines, the rhythm of their movements through the floor. This man was a stranger. He wore the gray robes of an auditor, a position that granted access to all levels of the administratum for purposes of efficiency, review, and corruption investigation. His age was difficult to determine, somewhere between 40 and 60, with features that were neither handsome nor ugly but somehow precisely average. His eyes, though, were remarkable. They were a pale gray that seemed to catch and hold the lumen's light, reflecting it back with an intensity that made me uncomfortable in ways I could not articulate. "You are troubled," he said. It was not a question. His voice was cultured, educated, the accent of someone who had received proper scholastic training rather than the crude hab-block dialect most of us spoke. Auditors were feared throughout the administratum, wielding the power to end careers and lives through reports to higher authorities. But something in his tone was not threatening. It was sympathetic, almost gentle. "My daughter is dying," I replied, the words emerging before I could consider the wisdom of sharing personal information with an auditor. The exhaustion and fear had stripped away my usual caution. "He is ill, and I cannot afford her medicine. The Medici station demands payment. I cannot provide." Vascor moved closer, settling into the chair at the adjacent workstation with fluid grace. He did not speak immediately, instead studying me with those unsettling pale eyes. When he finally responded, his words were careful, measured. "The Imperium systems are designed for efficiency at scale," he said. "But scale often means individual suffering falls through the gaps. Your daughter's illness is just one data point among trillions. The system cannot account for every tragedy." Something about the way he phrased it struck me as odd. Not cannot afford to account, but cannot account, as if there was a fundamental flaw in the design rather than merely a resource limitation. But I was too exhausted to analyze his word choice carefully. I simply nodded, my throat tight with suppressed emotion. "What is her illness?" Vascor asked. "Be specific." "The Medici station should have provided a diagnosis." "Bacterial respiratory infection," I said, recalling the board attendance assessment. "She needs antibiotics, but the cost is 140 credits. I make 70 credits per week. Even if I spent nothing on food or shelter, I could not gather that sum before she dies." Vascor was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice, though we were alone in the processing floor. "There are those who help people in situations like yours," he said. "Practitioners who operate outside official channels, who provide care to those the system has failed. They ask no payment, or very little. They understand that service to humanity sometimes means working around the Imperium's bureaucracy rather than through it." I felt a spike of alarm. What he was describing sounded dangerously close to illegal Medicaid practice, the kind of activity that resulted in arrests and servitor conversion if discovered. I must have shown my concern because Vascor raised a placating hand. "I am not suggesting heresy or rebellion," he said. "These are faithful citizens who simply believe the Emperor's mercy should extend to all his servants, not merely those who can pay. They use their skills to honor him through healing, as Saint Balthazar did before his martyrdom." The reference to a saint made the proposition seem more legitimate, though I had never heard of Saint Balthazar. My knowledge of imperial hagiography was limited to the major figures whose feast days were celebrated throughout the hive. But Vascor spoke with such confidence, such certainty, that I found myself believing him. Or perhaps I simply wanted to believe, wanted to grasp at any possibility that might save Ellen. "How would I contact these practitioners?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where would I find them?" Vascor produced a small slip of parchment from within his robes, already prepared as if he had anticipated this conversation. An address was written in neat script, along with a name, Davith. He placed the parchment on the workstation between us. "Go there tomorrow evening, after your shift. Bring your daughter. Tell them Vascor sent you. They will help." I stared at the parchment, my hand hovering over it without quite touching. This felt wrong in ways I could not articulate, like standing at the edge of a precipice and being invited to step forward. But what choice did I have? My daughter was dying. The legitimate systems had failed her. If there was even a chance these underground practitioners could save her, did I not have a moral obligation to try? I took the parchment, folding it carefully and tucking it into my robe's inner pocket. "Why are you helping me?" I asked Vaskor. "You do not know me. You gain nothing from this." Vaskor smiled, and there was something in that smile that made my skin prickle with unease I could not quite justify. "I help because I remember being where you are," he said, "because I know what it means to watch someone you love suffer while the Imperium's machinery grinds forward, indifferent to individual pain. Because I believe the Emperor wants his servants to show mercy to one another, even when official channels fail to do so." He stood, preparing to leave. "One more thing," he said, pausing at the edge of my station. "When you go to see Davith, be open-minded. His methods may seem unusual, but they are effective. Trust that those who help you have your daughter's best interests at heart." Then he was gone, moving through the processing floor with the same silent grace he had displayed upon arriving. I sat alone again, the parchment a small weight against my chest, feeling as though I had just agreed to something whose full implications I did not understand. The next day passed in a haze of anxiety and anticipation. I told Sierra about the underground Medicae practitioner, watching her face cycle through hope, fear, and desperate determination. She did not ask how I had learned of this option, and I did not volunteer Vaskor's name. Some part of me already understood that the less said about my mysterious benefactor, the better. We wrapped Ellen in blankets and carried her through the hab-block corridors as the shift change occurred, using the crowd as cover for our movement. The address Vaskor had provided led us down 3 levels, into the commercial district where small merchants and craftsmen maintained shops that served the hive's working population. The specific location was a nondescript door between a textile merchant and a recaf vendor, marked only with a small medical sigil that had been painted over and was barely visible beneath layers of grime. I knocked, my heart hammering against my ribs. For a long moment, nothing happened, and I began to fear we had been deceived, sent on a fool's errand while precious time slipped away. Then the door opened, revealing a man in his late 40s with kind eyes and a surgical mask hanging loose around his neck. "Davith?" I asked. The man's expression softened immediately. "Of course," he said, stepping aside to allow us entry. "Bring the child in. Let me see what we are dealing with." The interior was cleaner than I expected, though still far below the standards of an official Medicae station. A single examination table occupied the center of a small room, surrounded by cabinets containing medical supplies I could not identify. The smell of antiseptic and medicinal herbs filled the air, sharp but not unpleasant. Davith directed us to place Ellen on the examination table, his movements efficient and professional. He examined our daughter with a thoroughness that put the official Medicae attendant to shame, checking her breathing, listening to her lungs, examining her throat and eyes. His expression grew grave as he worked, but not hopeless. "Bacterial infection, as you were told," he confirmed. "Advanced, but treatable. She will need antibiotics, rest, and clean air. The first I can provide immediately. The other 2, you must manage at home as best you can." "How much?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with tension. "We have very little, but we can work off a debt if you require it." Davith shook his head, already preparing an injection from supplies in one of the cabinets. "I ask no payment," he said. "What I do in service to those the system has abandoned. The Emperor teaches that we are all his children, and children should not suffer when the means to alleviate that suffering exists." He administered the injection with practiced skill, then provided us with additional medicine in a small vial. "Give her this twice daily, morning and evening," he instructed. "The full course is 10 days. Do not stop even if she seems improved, or the infection may return stronger. She should show significant improvement within 2 days. I cannot accept this without offering something in return, I said, the words emerging from some deep need to maintain reciprocity, to not be simply a recipient of charity. There must be something I can do. Davith studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. There is a community, he said slowly, of people who think as I do. People who believe the Imperium systems, while necessary at scale, sometimes fail, individuals who deserve better. We meet occasionally to discuss how we might help those who fall through the gaps, to coordinate our efforts and resources. You would be welcome to join us, if you wished, simply to meet others who understand your struggles. I felt Sira's hand tighten on my arm, a warning. But looking at my daughter on the examination table, seeing the medicine that would save her life clutched in Davith's hand, I found myself nodding. I would be interested, I said. Tomorrow evening, Davith replied, writing an address on a slip of parchment identical to the one Vascor had given me. The 7th hour after shift change. Come alone if you prefer, or bring your wife. We are simply people talking, nothing more. No obligations, no commitments. Just conversation among those who seek to understand the world we live in. He handed me the parchment along with the medicine. Your daughter will recover, he said with quiet confidence. In 2 days, you will see dramatic improvement. In 10 days, she will be well. You have my word. We thanked him profusely and left. Ellen bundled in her blankets, the medicine tucked safely in my pocket. As we made our way back to our hab, Sira finally spoke. This feels dangerous, she said. Underground Medicae, secret meetings, people operating outside official channels. This is how heresy begins. She was right, of course. Everything about the situation should have sent us running to the nearest Arbite's precinct to report what we had discovered. But Ellen was dying, and Davith had offered real help when the legitimate systems had offered only bureaucratic cruelty. How could compassion be heresy? How could healing the sick be rebellion? I said none of this to Sarah. Instead, I simply held our daughter closer and told my wife that we would see how Ellen responded to the medicine. If she improved, we could decide then what to do about Davith's invitation. The improvement was exactly as promised. Within 2 days, Ellen's breathing eased dramatically. Her color returned, her energy began to revive, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Sarah wept with relief, and I felt a gratitude so profound it was almost physically painful. These underground practitioners, these people operating outside the system, had saved my daughter's life when the official Medicae had let her die. On the 3rd day, Davith came to our hab unannounced. He brought more medicine, ensuring we had adequate supply, and checked Ellen's progress with professional thoroughness. She is responding excellently, he said, genuine warmth in his voice. She will make a full recovery. Thank you, I said, the words inadequate to express what I felt. You saved her life. The system would have let her die, but you saved her. Davith's expression grew serious. The system serves the Imperium's needs, he said. Those needs are vast and complex, beyond any individual's full comprehension. But sometimes, in serving the whole, we lose sight of the particular. We forget that each number in a tithe report, each statistic in a casualty assessment, represents a living soul with hopes and fears and people who love them. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. The meeting I mentioned is tomorrow evening, he continued. I hope you will attend, not because you owe me anything, but because I think you would find value in meeting others who have struggled with the same questions you are beginning to ask. Questions about how we balance duty to the Imperium with compassion for individuals, about whether the Emperor's will truly demands the suffering we see around us every day. These were dangerous words, skating close to questioning imperial doctrine. But they were also words that echoed thoughts I had been suppressing for weeks. questions that had grown louder as I watched my daughter struggle to breathe. What harm could there be in attending one meeting, in simply listening to what these people had to say? I will come, I told David. Just to listen, to understand. No commitments beyond that. David smiled, that same warm expression that made him seem trustworthy, almost fatherly. Of course, he said. Come only to listen. That is all anyone can ask. After he left, I sat in our small common room, watching Ellen play with her toys for the first time in weeks, and tried to convince myself I was making the right choice. These people had saved my daughter when the Imperium systems had failed her. They spoke of compassion and mercy, of helping those who suffered. How could that be wrong? How could kindness be heresy? I did not yet understand that heresy is never sold as evil. It is always packaged as enlightenment, as liberation, as a more compassionate alternative to the brutal necessity of imperial law. The damned do not choose damnation knowing what it truly means. They choose it, believing they are becoming better, wiser, more moral than the system they are abandoning. I told myself I would attend one meeting, just to listen, just to understand. One meeting could not hurt. It was a small thing, a reasonable thing, hardly a choice at all. I was wrong about that too. The meeting place was an abandoned warehouse in the industrial sector, 4 levels below the main commercial district. The journey there took me through corridors I had never traversed before, past shuttered manufactories and dormant processing plants that spoke of economic decline and imperial neglect. The walls were stained with decades of industrial runoff, and the air had a metallic taste that even the respiratory filters in my collar could not quite eliminate. I walked alone, having told Sira I was attending a social gathering of administratum workers, a small lie that felt necessary to avoid her concerns. The warehouse entrance was a rusted door, marked only with faded shipping codes from decades past. I hesitated before it, my hand hovering over the corroded handle, feeling the weight of the choice before me. I could turn back now, return to my hab and my life, forget about Davith and his community of concerned citizens. Ellen was recovering. The crisis had passed. I owed these people gratitude, certainly, but not participation in whatever this gathering represented. But curiosity pulled at me, stronger than caution. What harm could come from simply listening? I pushed the door open and descended a metal staircase into the warehouse's basement level. The space below was larger than I expected, a vast chamber that had once served as storage for some long-defunct operation. Portions of the ceiling had collapsed, and makeshift supports had been installed to prevent further deterioration. Lumens had been strung along the walls, casting a warm yellow light that seemed almost welcoming after the harsh industrial lighting of the upper levels. And there were people, perhaps 20 souls gathered in a rough circle, sitting on crates and broken machinery that had been arranged like makeshift furniture. David saw me immediately and approached with a genuine smile. "Matthias," he said warmly, using my first name though I had never given it to him. "I am so pleased you came. Please, join us. We are just beginning." He guided me to an empty crate near the circle's edge, a position that allowed me to observe without being the center of attention. As I settled onto the uncomfortable surface, I studied the other attendees. They were not what I expected. My unconscious assumption had been that underground gatherings would attract only the desperate and criminal, the dregs of hive society with nothing to lose. But the people gathered here represented a cross-section of Vocrus Prime's working population. A woman in the gray robes of an administratum clerk sat across from me, her face lined with the stress of middle management. Beside her, a man in the dark blue uniform of the Adeptus Arbites, though without his armor or official insignia. A machinist with oil-stained hands and cybernetic augments visible at his collar. A teacher from one of the upper-level scholas, her posture speaking of education and refinement. Even a junior tech priest, his red robes marking him as a servant of the cult Mechanicus, though his presence here suggested questions about his orthodoxy. These were not criminals or rebels. They were ordinary citizens, people like me who worked their shifts and paid their tithes and tried to survive in the grinding machinery of the Imperium. That realization was somehow more unsettling than if they had been obvious heretics. It suggested that whatever drew people to this gathering was not desperation or criminality, but something more subtle and potentially more dangerous. A man stood in the circle's center, commanding attention through presence rather than volume. He was perhaps 50 years old, his hair graying at the temples, his bearing suggesting education and authority. He wore simple civilian clothing, but something in the way he carried himself spoke of former military service or law enforcement training. His eyes, when they swept across the gathered assembly, were intelligent and assessing, missing nothing. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber without need for amplification. "For those who are new, my name is Lyros. I facilitate these discussions, but I do not lead them. We are equals here, united by questions rather than answers, seeking truth through dialogue rather than accepting dogma without examination." The words were carefully chosen, I realized. Nothing overtly heretical, nothing that could be used as evidence of rebellion or corruption, yet the implication was clear. This gathering existed to question, and, in the Imperium, questioning was itself a form of heresy. "Tonight's topic," Lyros continued, "is one we have discussed before, but which bears re-examination. What is faith? Not faith in the abstract, but faith as we are commanded to practice it. Faith in the God Emperor, in the Imperium's institutions, in the systems that govern our lives. Is faith the absence of doubt? Or can true faith coexist with questions about how that faith is practiced?" He paused, letting the question settle over the gathering. Then he gestured to the woman in administratum robes. "Sister Vela, you have spoken eloquently on this topic before. Would you share your thoughts?" The woman, Vela, stood with the careful precision of someone accustomed to being watched and judged. "I was taught," she began, "that faith means accepting the Emperor's will without question. That doubt is the first step toward heresy, and questions are weapons the enemy uses to corrupt the faithful. But I have come to believe this teaching itself may be the greater heresy." Several attendees shifted uncomfortably at this bold statement, myself included. But Vela continued, her voice gaining confidence. "If the Emperor is truly divine, if his wisdom is truly infinite, then he would not fear our questions. A truth that cannot withstand examination is not truth at all, merely convenient fiction. I believe the Emperor gave us minds capable of reason because he wanted us to think, not merely obey. The institutions that claim to speak for him, that demand unquestioning obedience, may serve their own power rather than his will." It was the most dangerous thing I had ever heard spoken aloud. It was also, I realized with growing unease, very close to thoughts I had entertained in the privacy of my own mind. The Imperium demanded faith, yes, but that faith often seemed to serve the bureaucracy more than it served humanity. How many times had I seen inefficiency justified as the Emperor's will? How many times had suffering been dismissed as necessary sacrifice when it served only to perpetuate existing power structures? Others in the circle spoke, each adding their perspective. The former Arbeits officer described enforcing laws that seemed designed to criminalize poverty rather than protect citizens. The machinist talked about safety protocols ignored to meet production quotas, workers maimed or killed because efficiency was valued over human life. The teacher spoke of educational curricula that emphasized obedience over understanding, that taught children to accept rather than question. Each story was a small indictment of the system, a crack in the facade of imperial righteousness. And beneath each story was an implicit question. If this is the Emperor's will, what kind of god does that make him? Lyros guided the discussion with subtle skill, never pushing too hard, always pulling back from explicit heresy before anyone could become too uncomfortable. He acknowledged the necessity of the Imperium, the very real threats that justified harsh measures. But he asked whether harshness had to mean cruelty, whether survival had to demand the abandonment of compassion. The tech priest spoke last, his voice modulated by augmetic vocal processors. "I serve the Omnissiah," he said, using the Mechanicus term for the machine god they identified with the Emperor. "I maintain the sacred machines that allow this hive to function. But I have come to wonder whether the rituals I perform serve the machine's spirits or merely the cult's hierarchy. Whether the knowledge we hoard and guard serves humanity's advancement or merely our own power." He paused, his augmetic eyes glowing softly in the lumen light. "I was taught that innovation is heresy, that the sacred designs handed down from the dark age of technology must never be altered or improved. But this teaching has led to stagnation, to the slow degradation of humanity's technological base. We lose knowledge faster than we preserve it, and we call this devotion. Perhaps the true heresy is refusing to think, refusing to question, refusing to seek improvement in the Emperor's name." The gathering continued for another 2 hours, the discussion ranging across topics that would have seen us all executed if overheard by the wrong ears. Yet nothing explicitly heretical was said. No one denounced the Emperor or praised the Imperium's enemies. Instead, they simply asked questions, shared observations, and expressed frustrations that I suspected most Imperial citizens felt, but dared not voice. When the meeting finally concluded, people did not disperse immediately. They lingered in small groups, continuing conversations, clearly finding value in the rare opportunity to speak freely without fear of immediate reprisal. Davith approached me, his expression inquiring but not pushy. "What did you think?" he asked simply. "I think," I replied carefully, "that these are dangerous conversations. But I also think they are conversations that need to happen. The Imperium cannot improve if we never acknowledge its flaws." Davith smiled, satisfied with this answer. "You will return, then, for the next gathering?" I hesitated, but only briefly. "Yes," I said. "I will return." Over the following weeks, I became a regular attendee. Each gathering followed a similar pattern: philosophical discussion that skirted the edge of heresy without quite crossing it, personal stories of imperial brutality or negligence, careful questions about whether things had to be this way. And each time, I found myself drawn deeper into the community's perspective, finding validation for doubts I had barely acknowledged to myself. The people I met were not monsters or traitors. They were, in many ways, the best the Imperium had to offer. Educated, thoughtful individuals who genuinely wanted to serve humanity, but who had been broken or disillusioned by the system they had tried to serve. A former guardsman who had returned from the front lines disfigured and traumatized, only to be denied medical care because his injury had not been sustained in a significant engagement worthy of Munitorum resources. A woman whose entire family had been condemned to servitor conversion because a tithe assessment error had been attributed to deliberate fraud rather than clerical mistake. These were not abstractions or numbers on a data slate. They were people with names and faces and stories of suffering that the Imperium had caused through incompetence or cruelty. And listening to them, I felt my faith in the system eroding like rockcrete under acid rain. The cult, though I did not yet recognize it as such, did more than provide philosophical validation. They offered practical assistance that made them indispensable to their members. When the former guardsman needed medicine for his injuries, the community provided it. When the woman whose family had been servitor converted needed help appealing the decision, Lyros produced legal expertise and access to administratum channels I did not know existed. When my own hab's water recycler failed, and official maintenance would have taken weeks, a cultist with technical skills repaired it in an evening, asking nothing in return. This practical aid created bonds of gratitude and obligation that made questioning the group's true nature increasingly difficult. They had helped me, when the Imperium had failed me. They had saved my daughter's life. How could I suspect them of evil when their actions demonstrated nothing but compassion and mutual support? Lyros took particular interest in me, I noticed. He would engage me in private conversations after the gatherings, asking about my work, my life, my thoughts on what we had discussed. He never pushed, never made demands. But I felt myself being evaluated, assessed for some purpose I did not yet understand. His attention was flattering in a way I was embarrassed to acknowledge. Here was a man of obvious intelligence and capability, treating me as an equal, as someone whose opinions mattered. It was during one such conversation that he first introduced concepts that went beyond mere criticism of Imperial inefficiency. We had been discussing the Imperium's treatment of psychers, the sanctioned individuals whose powers were harnessed for astropathic communication and other vital functions, versus the unsanctioned who were hunted down and either killed or delivered to the black ships for soul-binding. The official doctrine, I said, is that unsanctioned psychers are dangerous, susceptible to demonic possession, threats to everyone around them. The Emperor himself established the protocols for dealing with them. Lyros nodded thoughtfully. That is indeed the official doctrine, he agreed. But consider this. What if the danger comes not from psychic ability itself, but from lack of training? The Imperium takes psychers from their families as children, traumatizes them with the soul-binding process, and then uses them until they burn out or die. Those who escape this system are hunted as criminals. But what if there were other ways to train and integrate psychers safely? Ways that did not require such brutality? That sounds like heretical speculation, I said, though my tone was more curious than condemning. Heretical, Lyros mused, or merely knowledge that has been suppressed because it threatened the power structures that benefit from the current system. The Emperor himself was a psyker of unmatched power, and he was not soul-bound. Clearly, there are ways to use such abilities without the barbaric methods the Imperium employs. The logic was seductive, I realized. It took undeniable facts, the Emperor's own psychic nature, official documentation of psyker treatment, and twisted them just slightly to suggest that the Imperium's methods were chosen rather than necessary. It planted the seed of an idea, that there might be other ways, better ways. Knowledge that had been deliberately hidden rather than lost. I found myself thinking about this conversation long after the gathering ended. And when I processed tithe reports the next day, reports from black ship operations that listed thousands of psychers harvested from dozens of worlds, I could not help but wonder, were all these people truly dangerous? Or were they simply born with abilities the Imperium feared because it could not fully control them? These were the questions that Lyros wanted me to ask, I would later understand. Each conversation, each gathering, each story of Imperial brutality was carefully designed to erode my faith in the system while offering no explicit alternative. They were making me receptive, preparing my mind for revelations that would have seemed insane if presented too early. Sarah noticed the change in me. She commented that I seemed more thoughtful, more distant, spending more time at these administratum social gatherings than seemed reasonable. I deflected her concerns, telling her that I had found a community of colleagues who understood the stress of our work, who provided mutual support in ways official channels did not. It was not entirely a lie, but it was not entirely the truth either. Ellen continued to thrive, fully recovered from her near-fatal illness. Every time I looked at her, healthy and laughing, I thought of Davith and the medicine he had provided when the legitimate system would have let her die. That gratitude was a chain, I realize now, binding me to the cult more securely than any explicit oath could have done. 3 months after my first gathering, Lyros approached me privately and asked if I would be willing to attend a smaller meeting, a gathering of what he called the inner circle. These are members who have moved beyond questions to answers, he explained. People who have found alternative spiritual philosophies that address the concerns we discuss in the larger gatherings. You are not obligated to agree with anything you hear, but I believe you would find the discussion valuable. I agreed, of course. By that point, I had invested too much emotional energy in the community to easily walk away. And I was curious about these alternative philosophies, these answers they had found to questions that had tormented me for months. I did not know that attending that meeting would be the moment I truly crossed from heresy into damnation, that the door I was about to walk through led not to enlightenment but to corruption so complete that everything I had been, everything I had valued, would be burned away and replaced with something that could never be called human. I thought I was seeking truth. I did not understand that truth, in the hands of chaos, is the most effective lie of all. The inner circle meeting was held in a different location, deeper beneath the hive than I had ever ventured. Lyros led me through maintenance tunnels that had not seen official use in decades, past rusted machinery and pools of stagnant water that reflected our lumens in oily rainbows. The air grew warmer as we descended, thick with humidity and industrial decay. I asked no questions about why such secrecy was necessary, though some part of me already knew the answer. What we were about to discuss was not merely philosophical speculation. It was genuine heresy. The chamber Lyros brought me to had clearly been prepared for ritual use. The walls, once bare rockcrete, had been carved with symbols I did not recognize, but that made my eyes ache to look at directly. Candles had been arranged in geometric patterns across the floor, their flames burning in colors that seemed subtly wrong, blues too deep and reds too bright. And there were perhaps 10 people gathered there, all of whom I recognized from the larger meetings. Davith was present, as was Vela the administratum clerk, and several others who had seemed most engaged during our discussions. At the chamber's far end stood an altar of sorts, a stone table draped in dark cloth and bearing objects I could not quite make out in the flickering candlelight. The sight of it sent a spike of pure fear through my chest. Altars meant worship, and worship of anything other than the God Emperor was the blackest heresy, punishable by death in ways designed to serve as public warning. I stopped at the threshold, my body refusing to proceed further. Lyros noticed immediately and turned back to face me, his expression understanding rather than disappointed. "What is this?" I asked, my voice tight with mounting panic. "This is not a discussion group. This is a shrine." "It is both," Lyros replied calmly. "We discuss, we question, and yes, we worship, but not blindly, not with the enforced ignorance the Imperium demands. We worship with full knowledge of what we serve and why." "I should leave," I said, even as my feet remained rooted to the spot. "This is heresy. If I am discovered here, my family will suffer for my crime. Ellen will be marked as the daughter of a heretic." Lyros stepped closer, his pale eyes holding mine with uncomfortable intensity. "Matthias," he said softly, "you have already helped us. You have attended gatherings where seditious ideas were discussed. You have listened to criticism of the Imperium and not reported it to the authorities as you were legally obligated to do. You have accepted aid from an underground network operating outside Imperial law. By the Arbite's definition, you are already a heretic. The only question is whether you accept that truth or continue to pretend you can return to ignorant faith." The words struck with the force of physical blows because they were true. I had crossed lines I could not uncross, made choices that could not be unmade. If the Arbites investigated me now, if they discovered my connection to Davith and Lyros, I would be condemned regardless of whether I had worshipped at forbidden altars. My attendance at the gatherings alone was enough to warrant execution. "You are afraid," Lyros continued, "and that is reasonable. What we offer challenges everything you were taught to believe. But fear born of ignorance is different from fear born of knowledge. Stay for 1 hour. Listen to what we have learned. If you wish to leave after that, no one will stop you. But at least give yourself the opportunity to make an informed choice rather than fleeing from shadows you do not understand." I should have run. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at me to turn and flee back through the maintenance tunnels, to lose myself in the hive's teeming billions and pretend this night had never happened. But curiosity and a perverse desire to understand warred with fear. And beneath both was a terrible question. If I was already damned by association, did I not deserve to know what I was dying for? I stepped into the chamber. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt something change in the air around me. A pressure against my skin like standing too close to a powerful electrical current. The sensation was not painful, but it was deeply wrong. A violation of natural law that made my enhanced survival instincts scream warnings my conscious mind was too slow to process. Lyros guided me to a position among the gathered cultists, for that was clearly what they were. They acknowledged me with nods but did not speak. Their attention focused on the altar at the chamber's far end. As my eyes adjusted to the candlelight, I began to make out the objects arrayed there. Books bound in materials I could not identify. Scrolls covered in script that hurt to read. And at the center, a symbol wrought in what appeared to be silver. An 8-pointed star that seemed to shift and rotate even as I watched, each point reaching toward infinity. That is the symbol of the ruinous powers, Lyros said, following my gaze. The forces the Imperium calls chaos and teaches you to fear without understanding. But symbols hold only the meaning we give them. This star represents not corruption but possibility, not destruction but change, not damnation but liberation from the tyranny of a rotting corpse god who feeds on the souls of his own servants. The blasphemy was so absolute, so explicit, that I felt my breath catch in my throat. To call the god emperor a corpse god, to describe the sacrifice of psychers as feeding rather than willing service, was to reject everything the Imperium was built upon. It was the kind of statement that would see entire hives burn to ash if it was spoken publicly. You recoil from the words, Lyros observed. But consider their truth. The Emperor has sat upon the golden throne for 10,000 years, neither truly alive nor honorably dead, sustained by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers whose souls are fed to him like fuel to a dying fire. Is this not the definition of a corpse god? Is this not necromancy on a scale that makes the Imperium's enemies seem merciful by comparison? That sacrifice is necessary, I managed to say, reciting catechism I had learned as a child. The Emperor maintains the Astronomicon, the beacon that allows warp travel. Without it, the Imperium would fragment and fall. Necessary, Lyros agreed. But necessity is not the same as righteousness. The Imperium has chosen a path that requires constant sacrifice, constant suffering, constant brutality. But what if there are other paths? What if the forces the Imperium calls demonic could be understood, negotiated with, even harnessed for humanity's benefit, rather than fought in an endless war of attrition? These forces cannot be negotiated with, I protested, my voice rising despite my fear. They are antithetical to human existence. They corrupt everything they touch. The Imperium's greatest heroes died fighting them. Entire legions of space marines turned traitor under their influence during the Horus Heresy. Lyros smiled, an expression of such condescension that I felt anger kindle beneath my fear. The Horus Heresy is the Imperium's foundational myth, he said. The great betrayal that justifies 10,000 years of tyranny and oppression. But consider what actually happened. The War Master Horus, the Emperor's most trusted son, turned against him. Why? Was Horus simply evil? Or did he see something in the Emperor's plan that horrified him enough to risk everything in opposition? He gestured to Vela, who stepped forward holding one of the books from the altar. This is a historical text, Lyros said, one that the Imperium has tried to erase from existence. It contains accounts from the Heresy written by those who fought on Horus's side, preserved by those who understood that truth must include all perspectives, not merely the victor's propaganda. Vela opened the book, her hands reverent despite handling what was clearly forbidden material. She read aloud in High Gothic, her pronunciation careful and clear. The Emperor sought godhood not for humanity's salvation but for his own apotheosis. He would have enslaved mankind to worship him eternally, draining their spiritual essence to fuel his ascension beyond mortality. We fought not for destruction but for liberation. To free humanity from a tyrant who demanded love while offering only servitude. The words were poison, each sentence a corruption of everything I had been taught. Yet they had the terrible ring of plausibility. The Emperor did sit upon the golden throne sustained by human sacrifice. The Imperium did demand worship of him as a god despite his own teachings that he was not divine. If one looked at these facts from a different angle, they could support the interpretation Vela had read. "This is just one account," I said, my voice shaking. "Propaganda from the traitor's side. It proves nothing." Lyros nodded as if he had expected this response. "You are correct that it is merely one account," he said. "But when you combine it with what you know of the Imperium's actions, with what you have witnessed of its cruelty and inefficiency, does it not at least raise questions? Does the Emperor's Imperium truly serve humanity, or does humanity serve the Emperor?" He let the question hang in the air while I struggled with responses that felt increasingly hollow. Every argument I could marshal in the Imperium's defense was undercut by my own experiences. The Medicae station that would have let Ellen die. The tithe reports documenting worlds stripped to death. The grinding bureaucracy that valued order over mercy, efficiency over compassion. "Let me show you something," Lyros said, gesturing for me to approach the altar. I hesitated, knowing that stepping closer would be another choice that could not be taken back. But the cultists parted to make a path, and I found my feet carrying me forward despite my conscious will's resistance. The altar's surface was not merely draped but inscribed. I saw now. Symbols covered every inch of the dark cloth, writhing and shifting in the candlelight as if they were alive. And the air above it shimmered with the same wrongness I had felt upon entering the chamber. Reality stretched thin as parchment. Lyros placed his hand upon the altar, speaking words in a language I did not recognize. The temperature in the chamber dropped suddenly, our breath misting in air that had been sweltering moments before. And the shimmer above the altar intensified, colors bleeding through from somewhere else, a spectrum that had no name in human language. I wanted to look away but could not. My eyes were fixed upon that impossible light, drawn like metal to a lodestone. And within the light, shapes began to form, not shapes in the conventional sense, but impressions of geometry that existed in more dimensions than human perception could properly process. They hurt to observe, yet were also beautiful in a way that made me want to weep. "What you are seeing," Lyros said, his voice distant as if coming from very far away, "is the warp, the immaterium, the realm of pure thought and emotion that underlies physical reality. The Imperium teaches that this realm is purely evil, inhabited only by daemons who seek humanity's destruction. But that is a lie born of ignorance and fear." The shapes within the light coalesced further, and I thought I could make out something like a vast eye, multifaceted and endlessly deep, observing me with an intelligence that dwarfed human comprehension. Terror surged through me, primal and overwhelming, but it was mixed with something else. Awe, wonder, the recognition that I was in the presence of something transcendent, something that made human concerns seem absurdly petty by comparison. "The being you perceive is a lord of change," Lyros continued, "a daemon of Tsiench, the architect of fate, one of the four great powers that the Imperium calls the ruinous powers or chaos gods. But these beings are not evil in any absolute sense. They are aspects of sentient emotion given form, shaped by the thoughts and feelings of every living creature in the galaxy. Tsiench embodies change, ambition, the pursuit of knowledge. Are these truly evil characteristics?" The eye within the light seemed to focus on me more intently, and suddenly I was seeing things I should not be able to see. Visions flooded my consciousness with overwhelming intensity. I saw the hive world of Vokras Prime from above, saw its billions of citizens as points of light representing souls, saw the patterns of their lives playing out across time like vast geometric fractals. I saw the Imperium's future, not as a single timeline, but as thousands of possibilities branching and intersecting, most leading to slow decay and eventual collapse, a few shining with potential for something different. I saw myself as I was in that moment, a small figure before an altar, and I saw the versions of myself that might exist in different futures. In some, I died screaming, torn apart by daemons or executed by inquisitors. In others, I rose to power within the cult, commanding resources and followers in service to unknowable plans. In still others, I became something no longer recognizably human, my body transformed by exposure to warp energies into a creature of nightmare and transcendence. And threading through all these visions was knowledge, information pouring into my mind faster than I could process. The true history of the Horus Heresy. The Emperor's original plan to eliminate religion and superstition from humanity, and his current status as the very god he had tried to prevent. The nature of the warp and the beings that inhabited it, not as mindless destroyers but as entities with their own agendas and philosophies. The thousands of ways the Imperium had failed humanity through ignorance and dogma. It was too much. My mind, unprepared for such influx of information and sensation, began to fracture under the pressure. I felt myself fragmenting, my sense of identity dissolving into the overwhelming enormity of what I was experiencing. I was Matthias Kale, clerk of the Administratum, and I was also something vast and distributed, a pattern within patterns, a consciousness spread across multiple timelines and possibilities. Then Lyros spoke a command word and the vision cut off abruptly, the light above the altar fading back to mere candlelight. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath, feeling as though I had been drowning and had just broken the surface. My hands shook uncontrollably, and my vision swam with afterimages of impossible geometries. What? I managed to gasp out. What was that? Knowledge, Lyros replied simply. A glimpse of truth unfiltered by imperial dogma. The architect of fate showed you reality as it truly is, not as you have been taught to perceive it. What you do with that knowledge is your choice. I knelt there on the cold stone floor, my mind reeling from what I had experienced. Every certainty I had possessed felt undermined, every belief questioned. The Imperium had taught me that chaos was simply evil, mindless destruction given form. But what I had seen was not mindless. It was incredibly, terrifyingly intelligent, operating on scales of thought that made human philosophy seem like children playing with blocks. Over the following weeks, I returned to the inner circle meetings repeatedly. Each time, Lyros pushed further, revealing more of what the cult truly believed and worshipped. They served Tsiench, the changer of ways, one of the four great powers of chaos. They saw him not as a destroyer but as a liberator, an entity who offered power and knowledge to those willing to embrace change and reject stagnation. The philosophy was seductive in its internal consistency. The Imperium was stagnant, they argued, its technology degrading, its institutions ossified, its people suffering under systems that had not meaningfully changed in 10,000 years. Tsiench offered evolution, transformation, the possibility of something better. Yes, that transformation came with costs, they acknowledged. But were those costs truly higher than the grinding horror of eternal servitude to a corpse god? I attended the regular gatherings still, playing my role as a questioning but not yet committed participant. But the inner circle knew I had crossed a threshold. I had seen the demon's eye, had experienced warp vision, and I had not fled in terror or reported them to the Arbites. That made me complicit, made me one of them whether I was ready to acknowledge it or not. It was during this period that I began to notice changes in myself. Small things, at first, easy to dismiss as stress or imagination. My dreams became vivid and strange, filled with symbols and visions that I half remembered upon waking. Colors seemed more intense, as if my eyes were perceiving wavelengths they had previously been blind to. And sometimes, in moments of strong emotion or concentration, I felt something responding inside me. A power that had always been there but dormant, waiting to be acknowledged and used. Lyros noticed these changes before I fully understood them myself. "You are developing," he told me one evening after a gathering. "The exposure to warp energies has awakened something within you. You have always had latent psychic potential, Matthias. The Imperium would have classified you as a minor psyker had you ever been tested, low-grade enough to avoid black ship collection but present nonetheless. Now that potential is blossoming." I felt a spike of pure terror at this revelation. Unsanctioned psychers were hunted throughout the Imperium, considered existential threats. If I was manifesting psychic abilities, I was already condemned by Imperial law, regardless of any other crimes. "There is no need for fear," Lyros said, reading my expression accurately. "The Imperium would enslave you, bind your soul to the Emperor's service until you burned out and died. We offer you freedom to develop your gifts without such brutality. Tsimche values knowledge and power. He will teach you to use what you have been given." And so my training began. Lyros and 2 other cultists who possessed psychic abilities instructed me in basic techniques, teaching me to sense the warp's currents, to draw upon its energies in controlled ways, to shield my mind from random warp-spawned influences. The process was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Each time I successfully manipulated warp energy, I felt a rush of power and accomplishment unlike anything my mundane life had ever provided. But I also felt something else, a presence at the edge of my consciousness, vast and patient, watching my progress with interest. That presence was Tsiench himself, I would later understand, or at least an aspect of his infinite attention. The architect of fate had noticed me, had chosen me for purposes I did not yet comprehend. Every time I used my developing powers, I was forming a connection to him, creating chains that bound me more securely than any physical restraint. The physical changes began perhaps 2 months after my first inner circle meeting. I noticed them first in the mirror one morning, preparing for my shift at the administratum. My hairline seemed different. Not receding, but changing in texture. When I looked more closely, I saw that some of the hairs were not hair at all, but something else. Something that caught the light differently and felt wrong to the touch. Feathers. I was growing feathers from my scalp, small and blue-black, easily mistaken for normal hair unless examined closely. I stared at my reflection in horror, understanding finally and completely what I had become. This was not philosophical rebellion or intellectual questioning. This was corruption in its most literal sense, my body being transformed by exposure to chaos energies into something no longer entirely human. I should have been horrified enough to flee, to seek out the nearest Arbeits precinct and confess everything, accepting execution as preferable to continued transformation. But the cult had prepared me for this moment through months of careful conditioning. Lyros had spoken often of the Imperium's definition of humanity as arbitrary and limiting, of mutation as simply accelerated evolution, of the transhuman state as superior to baseline humanity. And beneath all rationalization was a more primal truth. I had already gone too far to turn back. If I reported myself now, I would be executed along with everyone I had ever associated with. Sarah and Ellen would be investigated, their lives destroyed by their connection to me. My only path forward was deeper into corruption, hoping that the power I was gaining would somehow be worth the cost I was paying. I began wearing a hood constantly, telling Sarah and my colleagues that I had developed a scalp condition that made my head sensitive to light and touch. The lie was accepted without significant question, just another small hardship in lives already full of them. But I saw the concern in Sarah's eyes, the growing awareness that something was deeply wrong with me, even if she could not articulate what. The psychic abilities developed rapidly once I stopped resisting their manifestation. I found I could sense emotions from those around me, could occasionally glimpse fragments of their thoughts or intentions. I could influence probability in minor ways, making unlikely events occur more frequently, stacking odds in my favor. And most disturbingly, I began to experience precognition, seeing possible futures, branching out from decision points, understanding which choices led where. These gifts, as Lyros called them, were useful in ways that made them impossible to give up. I could anticipate my supervisor's moods and avoid his anger. I could sense when Arbites were conducting sweeps and ensure I was nowhere near suspected areas. I could see which data slates contained errors before opening them, making my work more efficient. The power was addictive, making mundane life without it seem unbearable by comparison. But with each use, I felt the presence at the edge of my consciousness growing stronger, more insistent. Tzientch was there, always watching, always waiting. And I began to understand that the power I wielded was not truly mine. It was borrowed, leased, a taste of something I could have fully if I only committed completely to his service. The daemon I had glimpsed during my first inner circle meeting began appearing in my dreams and visions. It had a name, I learned. Zalthris, a lord of change who served as an intermediary between Tzientch and his mortal followers. Zalthris spoke to me in visions, teaching me things I had no way of knowing through normal means, showing me secrets hidden within the Administratum's data vaults, revealing corruption and inefficiency I could exploit. And Zalthris promised me more. Power beyond measure, he whispered in my dreams. Knowledge of past and future, the ability to shape fate itself. All you must do is accept what you are becoming. Embrace change rather than clinging to the illusion of static humanity. Serve the architect willingly, and he will elevate you beyond mortality's limitations. I tried to resist these whispers, tried to maintain some core of my original identity, but I was fighting a battle I had already lost. Every time I used my psychic abilities, every time I attended a cult gathering, every time I looked at my reflection and saw feathers where hair should be, I was choosing corruption over resistance. The choice was not a single moment, but 1,000 small decisions, each seeming individually insignificant but collectively constituting complete damnation. 3 months after my first inner circle meeting, Lyros summoned me for a private conversation. We met in his personal quarters, a surprisingly comfortable hab unit in the middle hive levels that suggested resources far beyond what a normal citizen should possess. He offered me recaf, a luxury I had not tasted in years, and we sat across from each other in relatively comfortable chairs. "You have progressed remarkably," he said without preamble. "Your psychic potential has manifested far more strongly than we anticipated. The architect clearly has plans for you, Matthias. Important work that will require dedication and sacrifice." "What kind of work?" I asked, though some part of me already knew I would not like the answer. Lyros leaned forward, his expression intense. "The cult has grown significantly over the past year," he said. "We have members throughout the hive's infrastructure, in positions of influence and authority. We are preparing for a grand working, a ritual that will change Vokras Prime forever, that will demonstrate Tzientch's power in ways the Imperium cannot ignore or suppress." He paused, watching my reaction carefully. "This ritual will require sacrifices," he continued. "Lives given willingly to fuel the transformation we seek. But it will also require precise coordination, the manipulation of the hive's systems to create the conditions necessary for success. Your position in the Administratum, combined with your psychic abilities, makes you uniquely valuable for this purpose." I felt cold despite the warm recaf in my hands. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Lyros smiled, and in that moment, I saw something inhuman flicker across his features, his face becoming something with too many angles, too much depth, before snapping back to normal. "When the time comes," he said, You will use your access to disable certain safety systems, to seal blast doors, to ensure that the ritual zone remains undisturbed long enough for completion. Thousands will die, yes, but their deaths will serve a purpose far greater than their mundane lives ever could. They will fuel humanity's transcendence, its liberation from the Emperor's stagnant tyranny. I opened my mouth to refuse, to say that I would not participate in mass murder regardless of what philosophical justification was offered. But the words would not come. When I tried to voice refusal, my throat constricted. My tongue felt thick and unresponsive. And I understood then that I had lost even the ability to say no. The corruption had progressed too far. I was bound to Tsiench's will now, compelled to serve whether I wished to or not. Lyros saw my struggle and nodded sympathetically. "The choice was made long ago, Matthias," he said softly. "Not in any single moment, but in countless small decisions. You cannot refuse now. The architect holds your soul, and he will not release it until his purposes are fulfilled. But take comfort in knowing that your service matters, that you are part of something transcendent." I left that meeting in a daze, understanding finally that I was not a cultist with free will but a puppet, my strings pulled by forces I could not resist. And the worst part was realizing that I had done this to myself, had walked willingly into every trap, had made every choice that led me to this point of complete enslavement. That night I stood before my small shrine to the Emperor, the one I had maintained out of habit despite my growing corruption, and I tried to pray for forgiveness or deliverance. But the words stuck in my throat, powerless and empty. The God Emperor, if he even existed as anything more than a corpse sustained by human sacrifice, did not hear the prayers of the damned. I had chosen chaos, and chaos would not let me go. The mission details came to me in fragments over the following weeks, delivered through encrypted data slates and whispered conversations in the maintenance tunnels beneath the hive. The cult had grown far larger than I had imagined, with cells operating throughout Vokras Prime's infrastructure. Members in the Arbite's precincts who could delay investigations. Members in the power distribution centers who could manipulate the hive's energy grid. Members in the Vox network who could control communications. And members like me, embedded in the administratum with access to systems that controlled emergency responses and security protocols. The target was the Central Administratum Archive Facility, a massive data vault 3 levels below my processing division that contained personnel records for every cult member. If the Arbites obtained those records, they could dismantle our entire network in a matter of days, executing hundreds and condemning thousands more to interrogation and servitor conversion. Lyros explained this during one of our private meetings, his tone suggesting the operation was purely defensive, a necessary measure to protect the community from Imperial persecution. The plan seemed straightforward enough. A small team would infiltrate the archive during the night shift when staffing was minimal, locate the specific data cores containing our information, and destroy them using incendiary charges. I would provide access codes and disable the alarm systems that would otherwise alert security to the breach. The whole operation should take less than 30 minutes, with no casualties, if everything proceeded according to plan. I wanted to believe that was all it was, a simple theft and data destruction. But I had learned enough about the cult's methods to recognize when I was being told comfortable lies. Lyros was sending me on this mission not merely for my technical access, but as a test, an initiation that would bind me more completely to the cult through participation in explicit criminal action. Whatever happened in that archive, I suspected it would be far worse than simple data theft. The date was set for 3 weeks hence, during the Festival of Imperial Ascension, when most of the hive's population would be attending mandatory religious observations. Security staffing would be reduced to skeleton crews, and the chaos of the festival would provide cover for unusual movements throughout the hive's infrastructure. I was given detailed schematics of the archive facility, memorized entry codes that would be changed immediately after the operation, and introduced to my team members. There were 3 of us total. Myself, providing access and technical expertise. A man named Kresh, a former Arbeitsenforcer who had been expelled from service for excessive brutality and now served the cult as muscle and tactical expertise. And a woman called Mira, whose role was never explicitly stated but whose eyes held the same warp-touched gleam I saw in my own reflection. She was a psyker like me, I realized, probably more experienced and certainly more corrupted. Her left hand was wrapped in cloth, but I caught glimpses of flesh that had taken on a crystalline texture, mutation progressing far beyond my relatively minor feather growth. We met twice before the operation to review the plan and coordinate our approach. Kresh was professional and cold, treating the mission like any other tactical operation. He outlined contingencies for various failure modes, identified choke points and escape routes, and drilled us on communication protocols. His competence was reassuring in a perverse way, suggesting that perhaps the operation really would proceed smoothly, that I could get through this without anyone being hurt. Mira was less reassuring. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her words carried multiple meanings, layers of implication I could sense through my developing psychic abilities. She knew this mission was not what Lyros had portrayed it as. She knew we were being sent not just to destroy data, but to damn ourselves through action, to cross thresholds from which there could be no return. And she accepted this with a fatalism that disturbed me deeply. The night before the operation, I barely slept. I lay beside Sarah in our small hab quarters, listening to her breathing, watching the lumen's dim glow paint shadows across the rockcrete walls. Ellen slept in the adjacent room, healthy and happy, unaware that her father had become something monstrous. I thought about confessing everything to Sarah, about warning her to take Ellen and flee before the consequences of my choices destroyed them both. But I could not form the words. The compulsion Tsiench had placed upon me prevented any betrayal of the cult's plans. When I tried to speak of the mission, my throat constricted until I could barely breathe. When I tried to write a warning, my hand cramped and the stylus fell from nerveless fingers. I was trapped in my course of action as surely as if I had been shackled and dragged forward against my will. Except that was not quite true, was it? I had made choices that led me here. The compulsion only enforced decisions I had already made through 1,000 small acts of cooperation and acceptance. I had walked into this cage willingly, and now the door had closed behind me. The day of the operation arrived with the artificial dawn that marked shift changes in the hive. I reported to my station at the administratum as usual, processed data slates with mechanical efficiency, and waited for the evening shift change when the festival celebrations would begin. My supervisor, Hask, was in a foul mood, resentful that he had to work during a holy day while others attended services. He made several cutting remarks about my performance and dedication, apparently trying to provoke a response that would justify disciplinary action. I said nothing, merely nodded and accepted his criticism with the docility of someone who had far larger concerns than a petty bureaucrat's wounded pride. My lack of reaction seemed to frustrate Hask further, but he eventually left me alone, stalking off to torment some other subordinate who might provide more satisfying resistance. As the shift progressed and the administratum slowly emptied for the festival, I felt my anxiety building to nearly unbearable levels. My hands shook as I worked, and I had to revise calculations multiple times due to errors born of distraction. The feathers hidden beneath my hood seemed to itch and burn, and I felt the presence of Zalthris hovering at the edge of my consciousness, watching with interest as I approached the moment of my final damnation. At the designated hour, I made my way to the archive facility through corridors emptied by the festival. The few people I encountered were hurrying toward Vox speakers broadcasting the ecclesiarchy services, too focused on their own devotions to pay attention to a lone clerk moving through the administratum's labyrinthine passages. I reached the archive entrance without incident, finding Kresh and Mira already waiting in the shadows of a recessed maintenance alcove. "Ready?" Kresh asked, his voice flat and professional. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I approached the archive entrance, a massive adamantium door marked with the Administratum's seal and the Inquisition's symbol warning of dire consequences for unauthorized access. I entered my credentials into the security panel, adding the override codes Lyros had provided. The panel's display flickered, running through authentication protocols, and for a terrible moment I thought the codes were false or outdated, that we would be locked out and forced to abort. Then the display showed green, and the door's locking mechanisms disengaged with a heavy clunk of metal on metal. The door swung open on well-maintained hinges, revealing the archive's entrance chamber. A security checkpoint normally staffed by armed guards, but currently empty due to the festival's reduced manning. We moved through quickly. Kresh taking point with a compact stub pistol drawn, Mira following close behind, and myself bringing up the rear. The archive facility was vast, extending through 3 sublevels, containing not just data cores but also physical documents dating back centuries, the accumulated records of countless Imperial servants whose lives had been reduced to files and statistics. The data cores we needed were on the 2nd sublevel, in a restricted section that required additional authorization to access. I led us through the stacks, past rows of shelving containing parchment documents protected in climate-controlled conditions, following the route I had memorized from the schematics. Our footsteps echoed in the vast space despite our attempts at stealth, and I felt increasingly certain that we were being observed, that at any moment alarms would sound and security forces would pour in to apprehend us. But no alarms sounded. We reached the 2nd sublevel without incident and approached the restricted data vault. I entered more override codes, disabled more security protocols, and the vault door unsealed with a hiss of escaping atmosphere. Inside, row upon row of data cores hummed with activity, their surfaces crawling with indicator lights that pulsed in complex patterns. "Which ones?" Kresh asked, producing the incendiary charges he had concealed within his jacket. I consulted a data slate, cross-referencing core serial numbers with the information Lyros had provided. "Cores 47 through 53, I said. "Those contain all personnel records for the lower commercial and industrial districts, including everyone in the cult." Kresh moved to set the charges, working with practiced efficiency. The incendiaries were small but devastating, designed to generate heat intense enough to slag the data cores beyond any possibility of recovery. He had just finished placing the 3rd charge when we heard voices from the archive entrance, echoing down through the stacks. "Security patrol," Kresh hissed, his expression darkening. "They should not be here during the festival. Someone must have noticed the breach." "We have to abort," I said, panic rising in my throat. Kresh shook his head. "Not enough time. The charges are on a timer. If we run now, we leave evidence, and they will know what we targeted." He drew his stub pistol, checking the ammunition with grim purpose. "We handle the patrol quietly and complete the mission." I felt my stomach drop. Handle the patrol meant killing anyone who discovered us, transforming a data theft into murder. I wanted to argue, to insist there had to be another way. But Mira was already moving toward the vault entrance, her crystalline hand unwrapping from its concealing cloth. The fingers were no longer fingers in any conventional sense, but rather sharp points of what looked like amethyst, beautiful and terrible. The voices grew closer, and I could make out words now. 2 people, discussing the festival services they were missing, complaining good-naturedly about having to work while others celebrated. Normal Administratum security personnel, probably assigned to skeleton shift duty by lottery or seniority, entirely unaware that they were walking toward their deaths. I recognized one of the voices. Delman, a security officer I had worked with occasionally, a decent man with a family and a genuine commitment to his duty. He had helped me once when I had lost my identification badge, vouching for me to his supervisor rather than reporting the violation that could have resulted in disciplinary action. He was the kind of imperial citizen the Imperium needed more of, someone who interpreted regulations through the lens of basic human decency rather than mindless enforcement. And I was about to let him be murdered to protect a chaos cult's operations. Kresh positioned himself beside the vault entrance, back pressed against the wall where he would not be visible to anyone entering. Mira stood in the center of the vault, making no attempt to hide. Her mutated hand held behind her back. I remained frozen near the data cores, unable to move or speak, paralyzed by the understanding of what was about to happen. Delman entered the vault first, his attention on a data slate he was consulting rather than on his surroundings. Behind him came another guard I did not recognize, younger and less experienced. Delman looked up from his slate and saw Mira standing among the data cores, her presence obviously unauthorized. "Who are you?" he demanded, his hand moving toward the shock maul at his belt. "This is a restricted area. Identify yourself immediately." Mira said nothing, simply stared at him with eyes that had taken on an unnatural amber glow. Delman took a step forward, his alarm growing as he processed the wrongness of the situation. Behind him, Kresh moved with lethal efficiency, his stub pistol rising to target the younger guard's head. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, a crack of sound that seemed impossibly loud. The young guard dropped instantly, the back of his skull blown out, dead before his body hit the floor. Delman spun toward the sound, his training overriding his shock. His shock maul clearing its holster and activating with a crackle of electrical discharge. Kresh fired again, but Delman was already moving, diving behind a row of data cores for cover. The shot missed, ricocheting off metal housing with a whine. Kresh cursed and moved to flank, his movements tactical and precise. This was what he had trained for in the Arbites, the violent resolution of threats through overwhelming force. Delman triggered his Vox unit, calling for backup, his voice steady despite the situation. "Security breach in Archive Vault 2, he said. "Armed intruders, officer down, requesting immediate support." But the Vox crackled with static, his transmission failing to connect. Mira had extended her crystalline hand toward the device, and warp energy rippled through the air, corrupting the electronics until the Vox unit sparked and died. Delman realized he was alone, cut off from reinforcement, facing at least 2 hostiles in a confined space. The tactical situation was hopeless, but he did not surrender or flee. He charged from cover, shock maul raised, determined to neutralize at least one threat before he fell. The action was brave and foolish in equal measure, the response of someone who genuinely believed in the oath he had sworn to protect Imperial facilities. Kresh fired twice more, both shots finding their target. Delman staggered but did not fall, his armored vest absorbing the worst of the impact. He closed with Kresh, the shock maul descending toward the former Arbite's head. Kresh barely managed to deflect the blow, and the 2 men grappled, falling to the floor in a tangle of limbs and desperate violence. I watched this happen as if from a great distance, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Delman was fighting for his life against a cultist whose skills were honed by years of Arbite's training. He was going to lose, was probably going to die, and I was standing here, doing nothing to prevent it. "Help me," Mira said, her voice calm and almost bored. She had not moved to assist Kresh physically, but instead was gathering warp energy, preparing to unleash something that would end the fight decisively. I could sense the power building around her, reality warping in response to her will. But before she could release whatever attack she was preparing, Delman did something unexpected. He broke free from Kresh's grapple, absorbing a vicious kick to the ribs in exchange for mobility, and threw himself toward the vault entrance. Not fleeing, I realized with dawning horror, but trying to trigger the manual security lockdown, a red emergency lever mounted beside the door that would seal the vault and alert every security station in the building. Kresh scrambled after him, firing his remaining rounds, but Delman was already reaching for the lever. His fingers closed around it, pulling down with desperate strength. In that instant, everything hung in balance. If the lockdown activated, we would be trapped, and reinforcements would arrive within minutes. The cult's network would be exposed, hundreds would be arrested, and I would face execution after extensive interrogation. Then Mira's attack released, and everything changed. The warp energy struck Delman in the side, not as visible force, but as something that existed in dimensions human perception could not properly process. I saw his body contort, bones breaking and reforming, flesh rippling as reality itself rejected his physical form. He screamed, a sound of such pure agony that it seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my brain. The security lever fell from his grasp as his hand transformed into something that could no longer grip. Fingers fusing together and elongating into tentacle-like appendages. "Stop it!" I heard myself shouting, the words emerging without conscious thought. "Stop! He has failed. There is no need for this." But Mira did not stop. She advanced on Delman's convulsing form with clinical interest, studying the effects of her warp craft as a scholar might study an interesting specimen. The transformation was spreading, consuming more of his body with each passing second. His face warped, features sliding across his skull like wax melting in intense heat. His eyes burst as the pressure of mutation reached his skull, and things that were not eyes grew in their place, multiple orbs that saw into spectrums no human should perceive. He was still screaming. Through all of this, through the complete destruction of everything that made him human, Delman remained conscious and aware, experiencing every moment of his transformation into something monstrous. And in his screams, I heard not just pain but also betrayal. The understanding that someone he had trusted, someone he had worked alongside, had let this happen to him. Kresh had recovered his stance and was watching the display with satisfaction rather than horror. "Chaos craft," he said appreciatively. "More reliable than bullets for permanent solutions. Can you do this to all of them?" Mira shook her head. "This level of transformation requires too much energy for repeated use," she replied. "But it served its purpose. He will not be calling for help." I stared at Delman's transformed body, at the thing that had been a good man and was now a writhing mass of warped flesh and bone. The screaming had stopped, though whether from death or simply the destruction of his vocal apparatus, I could not tell. And I understood then that there would be no quiet completion of this mission, no clean escape without consequences. We had created a horror that would be discovered eventually, that would provoke investigation far more intense than simple data theft would have warranted. "Finish planting the charges," Kresh ordered, turning his attention back to the mission. "We are already compromised. All we can do now is complete the objective and get out." I moved like an automaton, helping Kresh place the remaining incendiary devices on the targeted data cores. My hands worked without my mind's full participation, muscle memory and training allowing me to function despite the emotional shock. Within minutes, all charges were set, their timers synchronized to detonate simultaneously in 30 minutes, giving us time to escape before the archive burned. We left through a secondary exit Kresh had identified during his mission planning, moving through maintenance tunnels that bypassed the main archive entrance. Behind us, Delman's mutated body lay among the data cores, a monument to the cult's brutality and my own cowardice. I had not wielded the warp craft that transformed him, but I had enabled his death through my participation, through my failure to act when action might have saved him. The journey through the maintenance tunnels passed in a blur. Kresh led us through a labyrinth of passages that seemed designed to confuse and disorient. But he navigated with the confidence of someone who had memorized every turn. Mira followed silently, her crystalline hand wrapped once more in cloth, showing no sign of the effort her warp craft had required. And I stumbled along behind them, my mind replaying Delman's screams, his transformation, his final moments of human awareness before mutation consumed him entirely. We emerged in the lower commercial district, far from the archive facility, in an abandoned warehouse that the cult used as a staging area. Lyros was waiting there, along with several other senior cult members I recognized from inner circle gatherings. Their expressions were expectant, eager for news of the mission's success. "Report," Lyros commanded as we entered. Kresh delivered a concise, tactical summary, describing the infiltration, the unexpected security patrol, the necessary elimination of witnesses, and the successful placement of incendiary charges that would destroy the targeted data by now. He spoke in the emotionless tone of a professional soldier reporting to command, making murder sound like a simple logistical challenge that had been successfully overcome. Lyros listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Kresh finished, he turned his attention to me. "Brother Matthias," he said, using the cult's form of address. "How do you assess the mission's outcome?" I wanted to denounce him, to rage at the unnecessary death we had caused, to demand why we had been sent into a situation where violence was inevitable. But looking at his pale eyes, I saw something that made me understand the truth. This had been the plan all along. We had not been sent to steal data. We had been sent to kill, to force me into an act so heinous that I could never return to my former life, to bind me completely to the cult through shared guilt and damnation. "We murdered a good man," I said, my voice hollow. "We transformed him into an abomination and left his body to be discovered. When the Arbites investigate, they will not rest until they find who is responsible." Lyros smiled, and I saw that inhuman flicker cross his features again. "You are correct on all counts," he said. "The Arbites will investigate. They will discover the horror we left behind. And they will be terrified, will understand that something far beyond their comprehension is operating within their city. Fear is a weapon, Brother Matthias, perhaps the most effective weapon we possess." He gestured to one of the other cult members, who produced a data slate and handed it to me. "You performed adequately in your first true test," Lyros continued. "The mission objectives were accomplished, and you did not break under pressure. That is all we required." I looked down at the data slate, seeing a new assignment already loaded onto its display. Access codes for additional administratum systems, instructions for further sabotage operations, a schedule of cult activities requiring my participation. The implication was clear. I was fully integrated now, an active operative rather than a questioning peripheral member. My daughter's face flashed through my mind, Ellen laughing as she played with her toys, healthy and innocent. I had done this for her, I told myself. I had joined the cult to save her life, had compromised myself to ensure she survived. But looking at the data slate in my hands, at the evidence of my complete corruption, I could not sustain that lie any longer. I had done this for myself, because I was weak and afraid, because I had chosen comfort over courage at every critical moment. "Accept what you have become," Lyros said softly, reading my expression with disturbing accuracy. "The Matthias Kyle who began this journey is gone, transformed as surely as the guard was transformed by Mira's warpcraft. But your transformation is more complete because it is spiritual rather than merely physical. You are one of us now, brother. You serve the architect of fate, and through him you will achieve greatness beyond anything your mundane life could have offered." That night, I returned to my hab in the early morning hours. Long after Sira and Ellen had gone to sleep, I stood in our small common room, looking at the few possessions we owned, the meager evidence of our existence. The shrine to the Emperor sat in its alcove, the candle burned down to nothing, its flame long since extinguished. I did not relight it. There was no point in maintaining the pretense of faith in a god I had betrayed in every meaningful way. I checked on Ellen, watching her sleep peacefully, and felt something break inside me. She was the reason for everything, the justification I had used to excuse every compromise and rationalize every choice. But she was also the victim of those choices, though she did not yet know it. Her father was not the man she believed him to be. He was something monstrous, a murderer bound to chaos, a traitor to everything the Imperium stood for. I wanted to weep but could not. The tears would not come. Whatever capacity for that kind of release I had once possessed had been burned away by corruption and guilt. I simply stood there, watching my daughter sleep, understanding that I had damned her along with myself through my weakness and choices. In the adjacent room, Sarah stirred, waking at the sound of my footsteps. I wanted to go to her, to confess everything, to beg her forgiveness even though I knew there could be none. But Sencha's compulsion held firm, preventing any betrayal of the cult's secrets. "I am home," I called back, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Everything is fine. Go back to sleep." But everything was not fine, and would never be fine again. I had murdered a good man and left his transformed corpse as evidence of my damnation. I had bound myself completely to chaos, accepting an assignment that would lead to further atrocities. And I had sacrificed my soul for power and survival, choosing corruption over death, damnation over righteousness. The dawn came eventually, the artificial lumens brightening to mark the beginning of a new shift cycle. I prepared for work as always, donning my clerk's robes, checking that my hood properly concealed the feathers growing from my scalp. In the mirror, I saw a face that still resembled Matthias Kyle, but that housed something fundamentally different, something that had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. I went to work. I processed data slates. I attended cult meetings, and I waited for the Arbeits investigation that would inevitably follow the discovery of Delman's body and the burned archive vault. I waited, knowing that I had become exactly what I had once feared and hated, and that there was no path back to anything resembling redemption. This was damnation, I understood finally. Not fire and torment, but simply the awareness of what you had become, what you had sacrificed, and the understanding that you had made those choices yourself, one reasonable decision at a time. I told you I thought I was choosing salvation. Now you understand what salvation meant. They came to me with kindness when the Imperium offered only cruelty, with medicine when Imperial law demanded my daughter's death, with community when I had only isolation. They seemed like the moral choice. That is how chaos works. It offers reasonable alternatives to genuine suffering, packages damnation as enlightenment, makes corruption feel like liberation. I destroyed everything I loved. I became everything I hated, and I did it willingly, one choice at a time, each seeming individually insignificant, but collectively constituting complete damnation. The cult promised freedom but delivered slavery, promised power but delivered only the compulsion to serve, promised transcendence but delivered only the loss of everything that made existence worthwhile. The truly damned thing, part of me still believes they were right, that the Imperium's cruelty justified my rebellion. That is what chaos does. It corrupts not just your body and soul, but your very ability to recognize corruption. I am the monster I once would have died to prevent. And somewhere, right now, another desperate soul is making my first mistake. The cycle continues, eternal and damning.